Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire drawing process of this aesthetic eye drawing using graphite pencils. So let's get started. As always, these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this 250 GSM paper from my ordinary smooth surface sketchbook, which is available in almost all the art stores or stationeries around the world. So you don't have to use any fancy paper for this specific drawing. And the drawing portion area is 6 × 10 inches. I drew the outline using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Okay, so let's start the detailing process, and I'm filling in the left portion with a pitch black base using an 8B pencil. Now moving on to the eyebrows, and as always, I'm darkening the previous strokes along with adding some new ones in between to give it a fuller look. I'm carefully flicking my pencil and adding these strokes to avoid blunt ends. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outlines and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. Okay, so for the iris, I'm firstly creating this texture by adding small strokes all around the pupil. I'm applying higher pressure in the start and flicking my pencil to add a stroke with thick starting and thin ending. Notice that I'm keeping the length and distance variable while adding these strokes to keep it natural and realistic. When the darker texture is done, I'm adding a 3D base in the whole eye portion by using my favorite pressure technique. I mostly use an 8B pencil while following this technique, but if you are still practicing it, you can use lighter and darker grade pencils to shade the area. Okay, now moving on to the lower portion, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding a 3D base layer in the whole portion. I'm also adding a few dots on the cheeks portion for the freckles texture. Notice that I'm keeping the angle on my pencil very low while shading and detailing to achieve a blended base without any harsh strokes. Okay, so when the darker texture is done, it's time to shade the area using an HB graphite powder. As always, I'm adding this layer by moving my hand in circular motions by using a bigger sized toy brush. I'm layering more powder over the darker areas and blending out towards the lighter ones to achieve tone difference. I'm switching towards a medium sized toy brush and layering the powder onto smaller areas until I achieve the desired results. When the base in the upper section is done, it's time to blend it, and I'm using a clean tissue paper and going over the required areas. Tissue paper will seamlessly embed and blend all the graphite into its place. Okay, moving on to the texturing process, and now I'll be working in smaller sections. I'm starting from the forehead portion and adding these blended dots and patches using a blending stump. Notice that I'm carefully dabbing it over the scraper with graphite to pick up the smallest amount of it and then adding the textural dots. I'm keeping the shape and size of these patches random to make sure the droplets look more natural in the end. When the darker texture is done, it's time to add the highlights, and I'm using my sharp tip electric eraser for these brighter highlights. I'm adding these small strokes and dots on the small left section. And when the brighter highlights are in place, grab your mono zero eraser and start creating a gradient towards the right side. And look how realistic these droplets have started to look. I'm also adding these small dots where required. Now to make these dots look 3D, I'm layering brighter highlights over them using a sharp tip electric eraser. Okay, now moving on to the next portion, and I'm following the similar process of adding brighter highlights using an electric eraser, and then creating the gradient using a mono zero eraser later on. As I was feeling kind of lazy, so instead of switching tools, I decided to use my electric eraser without turning it on to add softer highlights, instead of using a mono zero eraser. You can also try this to speed up the process if you want. As we move towards the right side, the texture is becoming blurry and unfocused. So I'm using my perfection eraser more oftenly to add base highlights instead of mono zero eraser. The process is pretty much the same, so I'm following the similar steps of adding base highlight first using perfection eraser, and then adding a few brighter dots and highlights using electric eraser. Okay, so let's move on to the eyebrow portion, and I'm adding these small strokes in between the darker strokes using a perfection eraser to make them look more realistic. Just like this. As we move towards the left side, the texture here is focused, so I'm switching towards my mono zero eraser and repeating the similar process to add sharp highlights. And I'm using the perfection eraser for the areas which need softer highlights. The hair portion is looking a bit crisp, so I'm going over the edges and adding the missing details using an 8B pencil. When you're satisfied with the darker texture, blend the area thoroughly using a medium-sized draw brush. Okay, so let's move on to the highlighting process, and this left side has some brighter strokes. So I'm firstly using my mono zero eraser to add crisp strokes in between the dark ones. And now topping off the whole left portion of the eyebrow with these small bright dots using an electric eraser. To make this brow bone area look shiny, I'm adding a blended highlight using my perfection eraser. You can always go back and adjust the highlights where required. Okay, so let's move on to the next portion, and I'm firstly adding the darker details in the iris using an 8B pencil because they faded away during the blending process. You can skip this step if your drawing looks as dark as required. Now it's time to make the iris shiny, and I'm adding these thin intricate strokes using my mono zero eraser with a flat tip. I'm applying higher pressure to add brighter strokes and then reducing it to add a few lighter ones. And this layering of brighter and softer strokes makes the texture appear more detailed and 3D. Also make sure to keep the length of these strokes variable. The eyelashes and sclera look a bit dull to me, so I'm adjusting it by adding depth and texture where required. Okay, so as I'm now satisfied with the darker layer, let's add the skin texture on this upper eyelid. I'm adding these slant strokes very carefully, keeping the pressure low on the eraser. Notice that I'm also adding a few highlights right beside the darker strokes of the eyelashes to make them look separate and shiny. Now it's time to top off the left side of the eyelashes with some bright dots, and I'm using an electric eraser for this purpose. I'm also adding skin texture on the right side of the upper eyelid as I did earlier. Moving on to this Sclera, and it has some softer highlights, so I'm picking up the graphite using a perfection eraser. Now I'm adding a fine texture on the right side using my 8B pencil by maintaining a very high angle and low pressure, just like this. To make this Sclera look realistic, I'm adding these softer yet thin strokes on the left side using a mono zero eraser, and then adding a few intricate highlights using an electric eraser. Okay, so now to make the waterline look shiny and 3D, I'm adding a mixture of brighter and softer highlights using erasers respectively. And during the shading and blending, the lashes faded away, so I'm again going over them to achieve the required depth. The strokes are looking a bit sharp to me, so I'm going over them using a blending stump. And look how blended they have started to look. Okay, so let's move on to my favorite part, which is skin texturing and detailing. And for that, I'm using my mono zero eraser. Notice that I've created a round tip and now adding these small dots of random sizes over the inner corner. And keep on adding these small dots over the lower lashes as well. I'm switching towards my sharp tip electric eraser and adding these brighter highlights in between and over the previous ones. Now I'm adding this tiny dot at the end of the hair to create a small droplet. And look how realistic it has started to look. I'm also switching my erasers in between depending upon the area I'm working on. Okay, so coming back to the skin texturing process, and this right side has very soft and blurry highlights. So to mimic such an effect, I'm adding these small dots and strokes using a perfection eraser. And make sure to clean the tip of your perfection eraser more frequently while working on such darker areas to increase its effectiveness. Now as we move towards the left side, we can see that the texture is becoming more prominent and bright. So to achieve such bright texture, I'm switching my eraser with a mono zero eraser and picking up the excess graphite. Also notice that I'm applying variable pressure while working on this area to achieve brighter and lighter strokes. Make sure not to overlap these highlights all over the darker areas, or else the whole area will start to look flat in the end. To make some of the highlights even more bright and shiny, I'm using my electric eraser and going over them with relatively higher pressure. This bright highlight is looking a bit flat, so to make it more detailed, I'm adding darker texture using a blending stump. I've added a very small amount of graphite powder over the tip and now dabbing it where required. After adding highlights, some of the intricate details faded away, so I'm adding them using an 8B pencil. I'm going back and forth with my tools and adjusting the details where required until I achieve the desired results. Okay, so let's move on to the next portion, and I'm adding these thin lines right beside the darker ones to create wrinkles texture. When the lighter texture using mono eraser is done, I'm adding a few darker details using a 3B pencil. The left side of the face has some softer yet brighter highlights. So to achieve such an effect, I'm using my perfection eraser and picking up the excess graphite. For the sharp highlight of the water droplet, I'm shifting towards my mono zero eraser and adding the highlight very carefully. You can also use an electric eraser to speed up the process. By using the same perfection eraser, I'm also adding a few softer dots and strokes in between the darker texture we have just added earlier on the cheeks. The wrinkles are looking a bit dull to me, so I'm adjusting them using an electric eraser. Okay, so let's add some dimension to the wrinkles texture, and I'm adding these softer highlights using a perfection eraser. Moving on to the lower water portion, and I'm firstly adding a base layer using a 6B graphite powder. Okay, so when the darker base in the water portion is done, it's time to blend it thoroughly, and I'm using a clean tissue paper. Now let's add the highlights, and I'm firstly adding these brighter strokes along the edge of the water using electric eraser, and then creating the gradient to give it a more realistic effect. To make these small droplets look more shiny, I'm layering highlights using a jelly roll pen. Now moving on to the next portion, and the process is pretty much the same. I'm using a perfection eraser to add the softer highlights. And for the brighter ones, I'm using a mono zero eraser and adding these lines and strokes over the lighter areas. As we know that the area is quite dark, so I'm applying higher pressure on my eraser to achieve the desired results. Keep on relating to the reference image to make sure you are on the right track. I'm switching my eraser in between the process depending upon the brightness and dullness of the highlights. If the mono zero eraser highlights are not looking as bright as you want, then you can always top them off with some brighter strokes using an electric eraser, just like the way I'm adding here. This will create the perfect detailed texture. As we move towards the right side, there are a few round highlights. So I'm firstly creating the basic round shape using an electric eraser, and then making the edges softer by going along the outline using a perfection eraser. And look how beautiful the texture has started to look. I'm repeating the similar process of highlighting using my erasers, just like the way I did earlier for the left side. Now moving on to the nose, and it's quite blurry, so to achieve such an effect, I'm firstly picking up the excess graphite using a kneaded eraser, and then creating softer highlights with a sharp tip perfection eraser. To blend the highlights a bit with the surroundings, I'm using tissue paper, and look how smooth it has started to look. The water portion near the nose has some water droplets, so I'm firstly adding the darker details, and then topping them off with brighter highlights using erasers, just like the way we have done earlier. For the final touches, I'm adding these brighter highlights with my jelly roll pen over a few droplets to make them look more shiny. And with this last step, we are done with this quick and easy eye drawing. It takes so much time and efforts to create these free drawing tutorials for you guys. So please leave a like if you enjoyed this one. It helps me a lot as an artist. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.